Hello. We as teachers, every day in our classroom, have opportunities to allow our students to participate in the practices of real science and engineering that scientists and engineers themselves use every day. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about the practices of science, I think of things like hypothesis writing and analyzing data. But a very important and interesting practice of science is argumentation. Argumentation is the practice that scientists, engineers, and even social scientists like historians use every day in order to be able to present their evidence, dispute it, and weigh it in order to find important answers and be able to find solutions to problems. But we as teachers know that getting students, especially younger learners, to do this is often very challenging and requires a lot of scaffolding. So we're going to give you a tool today called the Evidence Card Sort Tool. And we'd like to credit our friends and collaborators at the Lawrence Hall of Science for developing and field testing this tool with real students. I'm going to let them introduce you to the tool itself.
In a card sort, students are given evidence cards and one or more claims. In pairs or groups, they sort the evidence cards into columns. They position the cards according to whether they are relevant and supportive to a particular claim. By discussing and sorting the evidence, students consider how claims, evidence, and reasoning work together to form an argument.
And then this.
So it could have been only that there was a volcano in that certain area where the dinosaurs lived.
Let's do the first. So science analyzed.
We want students to learn the components of an argument, but we want them to learn this in an active way where we're not just telling them definitions. So the card sort is a great way to sort of break an argument down into actual pieces and let kids interact with those pieces in an active way.
So let's look at a real example of the Evidence Card Sort tool from beginning to end. Let's say that you, in your classroom, are having your students study different forms of energy that are used to power our world. Let's say that you want them to be able to weigh the advantages and the disadvantage of each type of energy. But you're not entirely certain that they understand the advantages and disadvantages. This is where the Evidence Card Sort tool comes into play. Now, to begin your activity, you need to create 2 sets of cards for each pair of students. The first set of cards will have the sources of energy written on them. They are wind, nuclear, coal, hydroelectric, and solar. You're also going to create a smaller set of cards with a different color lettering that shows some of the characteristics of these sources of energy. Things like, is the source clean and not carbon emitting, or is the source safe? Now that you have your cards made, we're ready to get your students involved. You want to start out by telling your students that they will be working with partners and that it's important today that both partners get to talk. It's important because the goal is not for the 2 students to come to agreement, but rather to hear each other's ideas and learn from them. In fact, if they cannot come to agreement, they should put the card in the middle. We find that setting your students up for success really involves using the gradual release of responsibility model, where I do the activity for you to see, we do it together for you to practice, and then you're turned loose to do it by yourself. So let's start with the I do portion. This is where you're going to give the directions, but you're not going to give them verbally. Instead, you're going to show them the directions for what to do using a document camera to help them understand. First, I want you to pick out 2 of these sources of energy. I think I'll start with nuclear and with wind. Then you're going to take the smaller cards and you're going to choose these cards and decide which of the 2 categories, nuclear or wind, this applies to. So our first card says clean, not carbon emitting. So I'm thinking that maybe this applies to wind, but not to nuclear, because I see some sort of smoke coming out of the smokestacks. Now we're ready for the we do portion, where you involve your students in order that they can see and hear what partner work looks like. So you're going to invite one of your students to come up to the front with you and work as your partner. In this case, I think I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, Robert Payo, to come up and help me as the student. Oh, hi Rob, how are you? So, Rob, what we have to do is we have to take these small cards and sort them between the two categories.
Okay.
The first one was clean, non-carbon emitting. I wonder where you think that one ought to go.
Well, from what I know, wind is a rather clean energy, but nuclear is as well.
Why is there all this smoke coming out of the smokestacks?
Oh, well, that's just steam.
Oh, so it's not smoke? Oh, well then where do you think we ought to put that instead of wind?
How about in the middle?
That makes sense to me because both types are actually clean. Thanks, Rob.
Sure.
And finally, we're ready for the you do portion. This is where you turn the reins over to your students. Be sure that you ask if they have any questions before you do that. Ironically, it looks like your major role is over. But as the teacher, it's important that you walk around the room, and this is where you do your most important work. As you walk around the room, you'll want to be sure to do the following things. First, you want to monitor for off-task behavior, and if needed, switch partners to get them on task. Second of all, you want to engage quieter students using prompts. Third, you want to listen for common misconceptions that you hear popping up in more than one group, so that you can address those later. Fourth, you want to solicit alternative explanations, especially from groups that seem to get done quickly. For example, are you sure that wind energy is safe and it doesn't harm any animals or people? Think about that. Finally, you want to record exemplars of great partner work, great argumentation, so that students can see what that looks like later. The follow-up after the students work as partners is very important. You want to bring your whole class together and ask them questions like, which cards were easiest to sort and which were most difficult? Why? You also want to address any misconceptions that you were seeing so that those don't persist moving forward. And finally, you want to hold up examples of great student argumentation, things you heard them saying or doing so that they know what that looks like. They'll love you for that. Let's recap a little about how to use this tool. Evidence card sorts can be used to argue evidence while sorting. They can provide a structure that stimulates critical thinking and productive argumentative talk. They can provide a platform that gets students actively involved in a way that promotes respect and safety. It's important to follow a gradual release model when employing this tool.